Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm back with Sarah, who studies brains. What's your official title, Sarah?
Yes, I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist.
Thank you. A pediatric neuropsychologist. I asked her that last time, but we were talking like about personal things because we're friends now. So we were talking about all the personal stuff before we hit play.
Yeah, exactly.
So we had a great conversation on the last podcast, but really wanted to focus in on teens. I know so many people have struggling teens through the pandemic, and there's so much that happens with a teenage brain. Can you tell us a bit about the teenage brain, Sarah?
Yeah, teenagers are so interesting, right? Because they look like little adults and they're trying to act like adults, but their brains are still not fully formed. We know that the frontal lobe, who, I call Franny because I picture her like that secretary in the school and she's trying to figure everything out, but she isn't quite seasoned yet. And that frontal lobe doesn't fully develop till mid-20s. And so really we have a bunch of teenagers who don't have the control and regulation that they need to fully be able to think logically and reasonably and abstractly. I mean, if you think about even abstract language development doesn't really develop fully till about 12. And so now we're talking about just outside of that. And so what happens is you have these brains who really want to push boundaries and be independent, but don't really have the capability of fully regulating themselves yet and controlling their behavior, their thoughts, and their emotion. And so that's why we get this push-pull at this time, because we're trying to give a little leeway to let their brains grow and develop that independence and form those pathways. But we also kind of have to be their external frontal lobe in a lot of ways because they don't have that fully developed yet.
Yeah, I read something somewhere that talked about how exhausting it is to be someone else's prefrontal cortex. Like, wow, do you realize how badly that could go? Or do you realize the consequences of that? And they don't oftentimes, right?
They don't, and they don't have the capacity for that. And that's why, parenting a teenager it's such a shift in parenting style. Because first of all, you're not the center of their universe anymore. That is kind of past that time. If anything, they're trying to push away from you in a lot of ways because they want to be this adult. They want to go out into the world, but they still can't do that completely on their own yet. So your style shifts to being much more of a supportive parent than doing the direct parenting yourself. So you're going to do things like asking a lot more questions, kind of leading them, pulling things from them, because the idea is that we want to have their brains develop a style for problem solving and thinking on their own, instead of it just being shutting down. But you're going to have that instinct to shut down.
Yeah. So really, I'm the parent, that's why is not as effective in that type of situation most of the time, right? I mean, maybe there are some circumstances where it's like, no, you're not going to hang out with a drug dealer tonight because I'm the parent. That's why. Maybe, in some circumstances, but you're saying it's better to lead them into their own conclusions when possible.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in this because we don't want to have so many restrictions that then the next phase, whether that be college or job or out on their own, they just go loose and then they're trialing everything. We really want them to trial things and to practice thinking and problem solving and deciding whether they're making good choices or bad choices while they're still under our roofs and why they're still with us as much as possible. And now this is going to go all the way up through college years too. You're going to get more independence, but you're still going to be there to support as they go along. So we're trying to really help build the brains. Because, I said that the frontal lobe doesn't fully develop till 25. There's a nice big maturation boost at a couple points, one at 12, one at about 16 and 17, when we asking kids to maybe start thinking about driving. So some kids are ready, some kids aren't. And then right about like 19, when their frontal lobes really need that last bit of, help developing, we throw them out into like drinking and college world and all of these other things. So we want to catch our sweet spot, right in between those two brain maturation points. To really help, again, their brains, the key is their brains develop the thinking skills, not us imparting those on themselves. So they want to go to a party. talking through what would that look like? What happens if there's some things there? What would you do in this case as the parent? Do you think you would let them go? How long should you be out? And start asking those questions. And yes, at some point you may get to, well, as the parent, this is what I'm deciding. And they're, oh, maybe I hate you and all these things. And that might happen in the beginning, but the more that you do that and the more you have that style and the more you give that bit of flexibility within your structure, the more you're going to help develop their brain.
And would your advice be to say yes when possible? So that way, when you said the no, it really counts? Or is it more of like you should practice saying no more so that they're more used to it? What would be your suggestion on that?
That's a great question. I think my response to that would be, you're going to say yes as much as possible, but it's to build their brains, not to get them used to those things. So you want them to fail a bit. You want them to practice and fail a little bit. You just want to be there to help to guide that lesson, but you want them to experience some of these. If they do get in a fight with friends or decide to go out, but stay out too late, and then they can't get to what they need to get to in the morning, maybe they're in a sport or something like that. That's good natural learning. We want that to happen. And it's such an instinct to swoop in and save them from that. We know what that consequence is going to be. You have a sleepover. We know you're going to be up really, really late, and then you're not going to make it to practice by 8 a.m. or you're going to be sluggish. And we want to save that. We want to say no for that reason. That's the time that you shouldn't say no for that reason. The reasons shouldn't be because I don't want to see you not meet this responsibility or something. We should allow some natural consequence in here because that's going to make a bigger impact on learning. Those emotions that kids get, that anybody gets, honestly, that's the best learning experience, because the more emotional you feel about something, the more you're likely to remember it and learn it and incorporate it into the way that you act and behave in general.
Well, my kids, I won't say their exact ages, but they're not teens yet, but we're getting closer. And preteen, yeah, that tweeny stage. And, I don't pack their stuff for them anymore. If they have something after school or they have, something going on, and I've had my daughter in particular, she goes, oh, you didn't pack this for whatever. And I was like, what? That's not my job. I don't work for you.
Like, no, we are on the same page with this. That is on the same page. I mean, but a lot of this is like working mom, you're juggling everybody's schedule, and you need your kids to be able to kind of hold their weight. I think it's a team scenario. So some of it is that, and yeah, you're going to remind them just like you'd hope they remind you of that book fair that's coming up or that thing that's happening or whatever. But in general, yeah, it's really important for people to start taking ownership, because again, we're promoting independence. We're promoting brain skills. And a lot of times, I think you would agree with this, that when you see parents doing everything for their kids, that's about the parents and not about the kids, right? And so, yes, you can be fueled by helping your kids and raising them and those things. But if you get so kind of enmeshed over there with you doing everything for them, I would just say check in and see, does my kid need me to do everything for them, or do I need to do everything for them? And if that's the case, starting to kind of wean yourself back from that for your kid's sake is probably a good idea. But yeah, those little steps like packing your own lunches, getting yourself ready for sports, knowing what you have that day, where you're supposed to be. Now, some kids are better at this than others. We have some kids who can totally take this up. Some kids, maybe even kids with more ADHD style profiles or something like that, or even just, some of our kids that aren't as checked in may have trouble with this. And I'm definitely not saying, well, you have lunch or you don't, I'm saying, okay, let's talk about, what do you want for lunch for the week? How are you going to get that? If you notice, there's a pattern in me asking questions, because when you do that, you're requiring their brains to work, requiring their brains to put things together.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm glad you brought up the, is it about you or your kids? And I know a lot of the women I coach are in the empty nest phase. Like a lot of the women I coach are in either late teen or 20 something. And when you're taught, oh, your identity is your children. What is your purpose? Well, my kids. And then they lose that. Right. There's two choices. They can either like lean in and latch on to their kids. I promise you this will not go well. Your teens will be very angry about this process as developmentally appropriate, right? Like their brains are made to start to break away and birdie leave the nest.
Yep.
And I've also heard that one of the reasons for conflict in homes with teenagers. If there's a parent who their identity is their child, and then they see that child breaking away, the anxiety piece of that internally for them can create more conflict in the home.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in so many different avenues here. And that's why, you and I have talked before about kind of helping moms figure out how to balance all these things and making sure and checking in and modeling things. Right. And
Yes.
I think that what are you modeling when you're so connected to someone, so attached to someone that your entire life is run around that person? That's not a great model for them growing up either, and I often say to people, what would you tell your kids if they had kids? Would you tell them to, to give up everything and do only things for them? Or would you tell them to have things that they enjoy also? And so I do think that teenage time, it's more taxing in a lot of ways as a parent, to kind of have to always be there to supervise and be home and not be able to leave alone like you might have been able to before. So we're not saying don't supervise, don't be there, don't parent. We're saying parent in a different way. Make sure that you're just always there. You're just there a lot. And you're asking questions and allowing them to go and just being there if and when they do fail, because again, we do want them to practice some things. We want them to explore who they are, what they like, what they don't like. Kids at this age try on a lot of different kinds of personalities, right? So don't be worried if you have a kid with one personality that you can't stand at this particular moment. It's not fully formed yet. They're going to try it. So let them try that out a little bit, give them a little bit of leeway to kind of figure out if they like that or not. Now, when I say that, I mean, don't put them in the box of always being this. We kind of started saying, we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries here too. This is a great example of, okay, you can try that personality on, but this isn't okay with me. We're in a relationship and you can't consistently treat me this way. I have a client whose daughter will lash out at her every time that she's having an emotion. There is a good boundary right there. No, you may have an emotion, but lashing out on me, it doesn't help anybody. So what can we do? Can we give some tools for what to do with those emotions? And let's have that conversation between mom and daughter to say, we don't like the way this relationship is going. I'm sure her daughter doesn't like yelling at her. She doesn't like yelling at her daughter. And we've now pinpointed the issue, which is that, okay, I don't know what to do with my emotion when it happens. Well, that's a solvable problem. Let's go and work on some skills for that. But I'm still putting down this strong boundary. So if you come at me with emotion, there will be consequences for that. And I'm going to stick with those consistently. And I'm a big fan of very upfront parenting. So nothing with my kids is going to come out of nowhere. So I always like those pre-conversations of, okay, we've identified what's happening, but now I'm putting down a strong boundary. I was giving you leeway. This is why I'm not going to do that anymore, because I'm trying to teach your brain something. Because of course they're sick of me saying I'm trying to teach your brain something, but it's true. And we move forward from there.
Well, teaching your brain something, or even, as an adult, if you do this in your relationships, this and this can happen.
Yeah.
Nobody wants a bossy pants, right? Like
exactly.
With my daughter, it's like nobody wants their friend to boss them around.
Right. You wouldn't like if someone treated you this way. You don't want to be in a relationship like this. And I think, again, goes back to modeling, right? So we're trying to model for our kids and then kind of grow these independent pathways. And, it's a tough balance as a mom. I think the best suggestion I can have if you have a tween or a teenager is to get a good mom gang who's got your back, because, even as somebody who does this for a living, I still need help. I need help when it comes to my own kids, because they go right at that emotion center. I call her Amy G, or amygdala, and Amy G is firing like crazy. It's really difficult to step back and say, wait a minute, what's actually happening? Not what the behavior is screaming, because that's usually something, if you're seeing something coming at you like that in terms of behavior, that's a message. We need to hear that, not the delivery of it, but what they're saying. And in order to do that, you have to step back, pull out your emotion. And the best way to do that is to have some guidance, whether that be a parent coach. We coach a lot of people through these kinds of things, or whether that be a good mom community of people who kind of are there or been there, or both.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because with the toxic person proof concept, right, which is what people are used to hearing me talk about. Part of me being toxic person proof is when I notice a strange behavior or notice something, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just run this by, my circle of trust, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to run this by my circle of trust and say, do you think I was just having a bad day, or was this really as odd or inappropriate as I felt like it was,
Mhm.
because when I'm emotionally connected to the issue, I'm not going to have as clear eyes. Like
Right.
my eyes will not be as clear when my emotions are involved. And that's my brain. And that's
Yeah.
your brain. It's not because I'm broken. I'm not messed up. I'm just not a robot.
Yep. And not just that, but you talk a lot about toxic people. And when you've had a toxic person in your life for a long time, you can also get more sensitive to it. So, I have found with clients and even personally too, that when you're around a toxic person for a long time, you start to kind of not think anything's toxic. Then when you get out of that and you go back, you almost have this PTSD or this
Uh-huh.
hypersensitivity to it sometimes. And so checking yourself is always a good idea. And it also helps you kind of form those boundaries. And
Mhm.
talking about, kids, especially when they're coming at you constantly, with teens coming at you like that, it is draining. And it's draining if you're a person who's trying to deal with other toxic relationships in your life at the same time. It's draining no matter what. Any stressor, you have in addition to this is a lot. And so being able to step back, ask, like you said, the circle of trust, ask, have a coach guide you through this.
Mhm.
We use coaches for so many things, going to the gym, making sure we're eating healthy, life coaching, parent
Mhm.
coaching is right alongside. And sometimes those even blends, that life and parent, because I'm sure you find that, we're not just moms, we have other
Mhm.
things that go into that. And again, these are great models for our kids to show them that.
You talked about the pendulum of it almost getting hypersensitive to things. And so I do like thinking of that as like, whoa, you nothing felt toxic. Like you had your hand on the like stove
Right.
and your hand was burning and you were just like, oh, it's not really that hot.
Mhm.
And then like you swing to the other side and your hand is burned and raw. And so the air coming may feel like it's burning your hand.
Yeah.
It's just air. It's not
Yeah.
hot. It's just air, but your hand is burned, right? And so working with a coach, working with a mental health professional, to get back in that middle lane is very common. And so I'm glad you pointed that out. And I want to say that's super common. And if you're parenting a teen on the
Mhm.
I'm raw side,
Right.
trouble is a brewing because there's going to be a lot of triggers in that process for you.
Right. I mean, it would be like somebody stabbing that raw hand over and over
Yeah.
again. And it may not be the same person, but it's going to bring up those same feelings. And I think that it's absolutely, and like you said, it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean anything other than the fact that you recognize now that you're having some triggers and you're going to work with them. And that's the best model for your kids from a brain standpoint. Again, you have your Amy G going crazy. We even have some issues with learning and memory when we're in those kind of trauma like states and we have those constant stress. So we have this funny brain chemistry happening anyway. You're more sensitive to it. Those neurons are firing faster. It takes a lot of practice to kind of desensitize yourself to that. Almost like you would do an exposure therapy for people with PTSD, where you expose them to, something that their trauma with some good supports in order to kind of reduce that feeling. You kind of have to do that in this case scenario. So like you said, when you've had this toxic person, plus you layer the teen on, it's going to be a lot. But after this constant practice of figuring out where you need to separate and how and what the boundaries are going to be, that's good, not just for you, but that's really, really good for your teen, because you are modeling that for your teen. You're modeling, hey, I can get triggered. And when I get triggered, here's the ways that I work through those triggers and bring my emotions down and try to figure out how to manage this better. Sometimes I might yell and scream back at you, but then I take that time, figure out what I need, access my resource, whatever that's going to be. And I'm able to come back and say, okay, here's how I piece through everything. I realized I was feeling this because this triggered me.
Yeah.
And I didn't like the way that I responded. So I went to therapy, or I called a friend, or I did these things. And now that I'm feeling calmer, I feel like I can have a conversation with you about that. So I'm sorry that I yelled at you in that way, and I want to do better. And here's why I think we need to come up with another plan. That process for them to watch when you have hormonal swings like crazy, when you don't know what you're feeling from one second to the next as a teen in general, is essential. And that's going to promote that emotional intelligence that you want to see. And they're going to hear you, even if it doesn't look like they're going to hear you. And you'll become this kind of mantra because you're teaching their brains how to do these things through that model.
You're also, as a parent, probably none of us have issues with saying, I want to teach you how to be kind to others.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have a lot less training on how to teach our kids to be kind to us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It feels a lot.
Yeah.
It's like, be nice to your brother versus be nice to me. I mean, those two things feel very different culturally.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to point out, as you were talking about modeling good behavior, it's like, if you put up with whatever crap your teen wants to spew on you, and then they start putting up with crap from other people spewing on them, there's a huge problem. But you're also modeling like, oh, I don't let people talk to me that way anymore. Oh, I don't let people yell at me. I can't hear you when you're yelling, but I'm happy to listen here in a few minutes. Those types of things can also model that to protect them from toxic relationships in the future.
Yeah. And from being the toxic person in their relationship too, because if they model that with you and they're constantly doing that, and that's getting reinforced by you, because we're moms, we're never going to leave. We're not going to not be there. Right. So we're going to if you allow the behavior over and over and you understand, well, they're going through something. And so you just allow them to treat you that way consistently. They never develop those skills that we just talked about with managing emotion and being able to work through things and figuring out what they feel so they can connect that to the behavior so they can shift it up and change it. They're never going to do that. And so then they could get into a relationship where they're acting that way towards whoever they're in that relationship with, towards a spouse, towards something like that. And now you've perpetuated this terrible cycle. And they won't feel good about that either in the end, and so they're going to need people's, they're going to need to hurt people in order to feel better. And that's not what we want.
Well, it's releasing that pressure valve.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I hear all the time, I love your opinion on this, because I hear it's like, oh, well, oftentimes the moms are the safe space.
Mm-hmm.
So their worst behavior comes out with their mothers because that's the safe space. And there's pieces of that I agree with. And at the same time, the lesson our children are learning is, when you have emotions get too big for your body, the way you release that is yelling at me or taking that out. I become the punching bag. Your emotional pressure valve is released and you feel better, but I was the punching bag. Like, I'd like to have that conversation, because I know a lot of
I don't
moms
think it's I think it's an and. I think you are the safe place, and and we have to watch. So that's what I meant about giving some wiggle room. It depends on what kind of mom you are too, and what kind of relationship that you have with your child. But in general, I think you probably are the safe place. A lot of times moms are. And so, yes, a lot is going to come at you, and you may give a little wiggle room for that, but a little wiggle room and a perpetual pattern of harm are two different things. And so, when things are going on, you can give that kind of space. And then after that, you have to put down a boundary. And that's what I mean about being upfront with the parenting, is I get things are going on. I get you've been yelling at me a little bit more, not a fan of it, but I understand where it's coming from. That happens, once or twice or something like that. That's one thing. But when it's a consistent pattern, it's usually the sign that they're going through something and they're not handling it very well because it's coming out at you. Then our job is to say, wait a minute, this isn't a once or twice kind of thing. This is something big happening, and we need to figure out how to handle that instead of you spewing it out this way. And I think that's where the boundary comes in. So yes, you can be the safe place. And I think a lot of moms lean into that. Oh, I'm a safe place. And it feels good to be the safe place, as much as it feels bad to be the punching bag. You still get something out of being that safe place. You want to be that safe place, but that doesn't mean you can still be the safe place with some, okay, this is the wiggle room here. And then we're done with that wiggle room, and you can't constantly be spewing that out. So I think that there's some boundaries there. And there's also a really interesting relationship between moms and daughters, same-sex relationships. I see it with dads and sons too, but with moms and daughters, I find myself mimicking my own relationship with my mother, with my daughter, and then trying to figure out how do I want to, maybe treat her better or have her treat me better in certain places. And I have a great relationship with my mother, but sometimes I'll call her and yell at her and get, and get all that emotion out too, and then hang up and feel like, okay, I got it. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I just made her feel awful. And it's not till now that I realize, with my daughter, what that's like from the other side, so you sometimes have to get out of these old habits, but we are harder on the same sex person in the household. And I would say just embrace that fact and work together and just say, we have this is us. I'm going to be, I often say like, my daughter, she's a girl. She can pull herself up by her bootstraps. And my son, I'm like, oh, what does he need? Do you know?
Oh gosh, I'm so with you.
You don't have to catch myself because I'm like, come on. You have a headache, take 2 Advil. It'll be fine, and I hit him. I'm like, okay, well, do you want me to massage your back or something? Is it, this is why men have problems because of their mothers. I recognize this, but the point is there is something funny with that relationship. So just know that going in and just embrace that and laugh about it and talk about it and recognize it, because when you have the insight into it, you can make those couple changes. For me with my son, as much as I might want to do all those things I just joked about, there might be times I do it, but there's also times where I have to hold myself back from doing it because I know that he has to have that same growth. We baby them sometimes too. So just watch
His
those different
future wife will thank you. That's why, his future wife will thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and I do want to.
She'll call you to thank you because you're going to have such a good relationship with him that he's going to be on the phone with you, and then he's going to hand it over, right? And then you're all going to talk.
No, that's right. No. Oh yeah. My son and I feel like we share a soul. I mean, we are just so close. Let's talk about too, within that getting triggered boundary setting, how important it is for the mothers to both model and to finish out the stress cycle before going, whether it be a walk, whether it be like 10 jumping jacks, whether it be brushing yourself off, if you have that interaction where you feel like your child is spewing or something like that, my highest recommendation is finish out that stress cycle rather than it just sitting.
Yeah. I mean, because it'll build, right? It builds and builds and builds, and it probably will still build, especially if you're in the middle of a phase. I often like to tell parents that, these are phases, especially at the preteen going into the teen, remember that they will come out of it eventually. If you just study the course, but that is a really hard course to study. So I completely agree with, and modeling that I need to work out right now. We are at each other's throats. It's driving me as crazy as it's driving you. I'm going to work out. You should do something else, and we'll come back and talk about it. Because not everything, especially with teens, they do have the capacity for longer term thinking. They're not like an infant or a toddler where you need to kind of give an immediate consequence. So it's okay to say, I don't like the way this is going. We need to pause and we'll come back. And that has actually been very successful for me personally with my daughter, who are going through these things together. And I think it's been very successful for the families I've worked with too, to say, hold up, we're going to pause. So we have times that we have those kinds of conflicts, pause and come back, right? Because and even if it's things like there's going to be a consequence to this, I just need to think about it. That's okay. That's modeling such good emotional control, problem solving, your regulation, all of those things. And it's okay to be able to say those things, to step back. But even in the midst of, again, especially when you've had toxic people, we talked about that raw hand, right? That's a good strategy to say, okay, I'm noticing I'm getting triggered here. Let's pause. Yeah. We're going to come back, even if it's 5 minutes, sometimes that can help. And then after you've had a couple of those and you're kind of building up to, like you said, make sure that you're taking care of yourself and rounding all of those things out. And it's okay I can't say how many times I like to be upfront, because that's when you're talking these things out loud, you're modeling for kids. We often do this in our head. So you might be like, I got to get to the gym. I need to get to the gym. Maybe I'm running after work. I'm going to go to the gym because I just can't stand it. But to call and say, hey, I need to get to the gym today because we've been really at each other and I just need some space right now. I'm going to go to the gym, and then we come home. Maybe we can have 5 minutes to talk. To say it out loud is that model. They'll start to say it back to you. You'll hear it with their friends, probably more likely to hear it with their friends before they say it back to you. And you'll realize that things are sticking.
And even thinking saying I want to bring my best self to the conversation. Like
I
even if
love
it's
that.
not, I need a break. It's like I want to be able to bring my best self to this conversation. So I need to go to the gym to be able to bring my best self to this conversation, or something along those lines. I
Yeah.
do a lot of uh, high performance type stuff with my
Mm-hmm.
ladies, and really also that's another opportunity to model how do you bring your best self into a big interview, a big work
Right.
thing, a big, like what does that mean to bring your best self into something, right? Because we hear a lot
Right.
about like authenticity. It's like, well, but if you feel crappy that day, is everything going to be crappy, or is there
Right.
a
Right.
system for excellence and
Right.
success?
And on the flip side, you're helping kids develop that piece to themselves too. So
Mhm.
I like to even give them the out, ooh, it seems like you're going to get yourself into
Yeah.
something here that you can't get out of. Let's pause so that you can get yourself to, I can get, neither one of us say something we don't mean, but what you're really saying is stop that hole you're digging. I don't want to see you do the whole, or you're yelling and screaming. That's all Amy G. That has nothing to do with, your logical part. If you just chilled out for 5 minutes, you would recognize that and stop those words coming out of your mouth. So to help them learn that pause, this is just like when your kids were little and you did a timeout so that they could get their emotions under control and come back. It's that same concept, just up in the teen years.
Oh, I love this. Sarah, tell people where they can find out more about you and your work.
Well, you can always go to brainbehaviorbridge.com. That's my website. It has any other media podcast, things like that on it, as well as you can find my book, Raising Brains, on that site as well. And then if you want more conversations similar to this, or you just need some support, want a good mom community, you can go to mybraingal.com, and that'll take you right to the private Facebook page, and love to see you join us there too.
So if you had a 1-minute broadcast to the world about teenagers, what would you tell everyone?
They're all Amy G and no Franny. So you have to
Mhm.
be their external Franny. You still have to be that regulation control center, but you're teaching them how to develop that for themselves. So instead of guiding and smushing and saying no, make sure that you're thinking about how can I get their brains to think in the way that they're going to need to think to be an independent adult? How do I grow their Franny to be able to regulate and control on its own and keep Amy G at bay?
I love it. Sarah, thank you for coming and helping us again learn to become toxic person proof. Great
Thanks.
conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.